You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm good, man. I'm fully vaccinated. I think my tracking chips are flowing through my blood and not providing any negative consequences so far.
How's your 5G signal reception? Are you getting full bars now?
Yeah, but I feel like horns are growing out of the top of my head, so not sure what that's from. But, interestingly enough, I was kind of trying to figure out what our situation is for conferences for the rest of the year. As we talked about, the Authenticate conference, which is FIDO's conference, is coming up in October 18th, 2021, in Seattle at the Motif Hotel. We've been to a conference there before. It's a really great setting. It's a smaller venue, but great place to have a conference and interact and network with other people. You and I submitted a application to call for speakers, so who knows if that'll be approved or not. But either way, I'm hoping we can get there and maybe do a cool little episode of the show. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. I think, we'll see if we get selected. I think either way, whether we get selected to speak or not, I think we'll both try to make it out there. And that'll be a spot that we want to be at to maybe potentially do an interview. Or three.
We've talked about trying to do like a live show or a live stream. That could get interesting, right? I mean, to try to launch doing something like that for the first time and being in a new territory. In other words, not knowing what the Wi-Fi situation is and things like that. It might be too much new at once. But that's something that we've gotten feedback from our listeners in terms of we'd like to see you guys do a live stream, and the software we're using now really potentially could enable that.
Yeah, I think it's something we both want to do for a while. I think last year we kind of took a mulligan just because of the travel arrangement wasn't working out for COVID and stuff like that. But we might pick it up at some point here. So I'm up for it. I think, we can always record something, and if it sucks, either we don't release it or, we figure out a different game plan to kind of tweak it into something that might be usable for people.
Right. Yeah. And that's really the only in-person conference that I've really potentially looked at for this year anyway, but I'm definitely looking to get back on the circuit again next year.
Yeah, I've got the bug. I'm vaccinated too. I'm ready to go. I got some personal travel stuff taking place throughout July and August, and I think the first work travel would be potentially that conference to Seattle. So looking forward to it, because I think, as I mentioned in our last podcast, we talked about favorite vacation spots, and my personal vacation career has not been stellar. It's been to relatively boring places. I do far more interesting travel for work than I do for personal, but hopefully we'll change that soon.
Yeah.
So today we're going to get into identity, and I think one of the conversation topics that we'll probably want to approach here is really kind of talking about identity fabrics and orchestration, and what the heck does that even mean, and trying to kind of decipher, how does that work in the real world. And we've invited Gerry Gebel from Strata.io to join us, or Strata Identity. He's the head of standards to help with this conversation. So welcome to the show, Gerry.
Well, Jeff and Jim, thanks for that very much. Thanks for the intro and the invitation to be part of the Identity at the Center podcast series. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And I think, as a first timer on their show, we like to really kind of discover kind of your background and how you got into the identity space. And one of the theories that I have is that for the most part, most people didn't choose identity. It kind of chose them. And I'm curious if that's the same for you. How did you get into the identity space?
Well, it's a bit of a long and winding story, I guess. I'm not sure if I was pushed or pulled into it, maybe a combination of the two. My time started in security, so before identity even was a thing in the industry. So that was back when I was at Chase Bank in New York, and had a great mentor there. So I think a mentor has a big role in how our career is guided over time in the opportunities that are presented and the ones that we take or not. So I had a great mentor there, Bill Wan, who really emphasized the need, the importance of getting outside of your cubicle or office and seeing what's happening in the world. And so he really encouraged me to be part of some of the standards activities at the time, for example, at the Open Group. And then also was part of starting an organization on Wall Street that we called the Securities Industry Middleware Council, where I met another great mentor from that time period, Elliot Solomon. And that really expanded the horizons and got me introduced to a number of different people, including folks at the Burton Group. So that's how I got connected with Burton Group and joined them, I guess, around 2000 as part of their consulting team. And at the time, the Burton had two services. Excuse me. One was directory and security, and the other was networking. And what I was part of when I joined was we actually split up directory and security. So we had a security practice, and then the directory side became identity and privacy. So I guess that's my intro into the identity industry. And from there, went on to join Axiomatics, focusing on dynamic authorization, and now here, of course, at Strata.
Cool background, Gerry. And one of the things that really popped out to me was Burton Group. I mean, that was the analyst firm covering the IAM space. As I got into the industry around 2003 timeframe, wondering what it was like working at an analyst firm like Burton Group and kind of being the go-to for, how do we look at the space? How do we develop our strategy? How do you compare product A to product B? Things like that.
Well, it was an incredible experience, I have to say. The people I got to meet and work with there, it's just a who's who list of people in the industry. Many of the names we'd be familiar with. It was incredibly intellectually stimulating, working with all of these smart people and being the dumbest guy in the room and just soaking it all in. It was really, from that perspective, an amazing experience. And the whole process of, being a consultant or a research analyst was quite a jump from being, an individual practitioner within an IT department. But you just learn over time. You learn from your colleagues, and you take in all that guidance. And it was a big job. It was a huge responsibility too, I think, to be part of that industry, because so many people, as customers of the research service, are looking to us for very important guidance. So it definitely was a combination of, just a great work environment with an amazing group of people, but also, that burden of the responsibility of, you really had to do your work, do your research, think about what you're writing, what you're presenting on stage, because it was so impactful for so many people. So I think that was, it was quite a combination.
Yeah, you mentioned the alumni of the Burton Group. We had Ian Glazer on in an earlier episode. That was episode 76 for anybody who wants to scroll back and take a listen. But I'm wondering, the Burton alumni, do you guys have like a Slack channel, or do you guys stay in touch at all?
Informally. I think there's, small groups of us that still make the conference circuit, like you were talking about before. Hopefully starting to get back into the swing of that later this year, or certainly into next year. So, there's some informal, expert and alumni that will get together at the bar afterwards and swap stories and so on. But nothing formal at the moment.
No secret handshake or anything like that? Or
No, nothing like that.
I think one of the things I always find interesting around the kind of the analyst consultant versus what I'll call a quote unquote normal consultant is having to be able to keep track of all the different products in the space. And I think, for better or for worse, I think a lot of organizations will take a look at analyst reports and say, okay, this sounds good. And then they might invite the person who actually wrote the report to kind of talk to them directly and say, okay, so tell me, what is exactly the difference between SailPoint and Savient? Why is one better than the other? Or Ping and Okta, right? Or Microsoft or whatever it may be. And I would find that extremely challenging, I would think, to be able to stay on top of so many products in the space and have it, with the way that the velocity of the really kind of the industry has picked up, especially over the last, couple of decades. How do you stay on top of all that stuff?
Well, to your first point there, I will say, yes, it can be very uncomfortable sometimes when a customer prints out one of your reports and they start going through it paragraph by paragraph. What did you really mean here? And that can be a little challenging. But I think to your later question, one person can't know everything. I mean, you look at Gartner today. I mean, how many thousand analysts do they have? I mean, it's an incredible number. And it shows how you have to start to divide and specialize a little bit. And we did that at Burton Group. We had, across the team of analysts, they would focus on different areas, whether based on their experience or their background. And then when you get a customer call, inquiry about a certain topic, if it wasn't in your wheelhouse, then you had to defer to someone else, or because you don't want to, I think, go down the path of talking confidently about topics that you're not really an expert in, because that's where I think you're in the danger zone.
Yeah, I think knowing when to engage and when to pull back and defer, I think is important. And I think, there's one other thing that you mentioned about, not being the smartest guy in the room. I think everyone can relate to that. And I think it's commonly referred to clinically as imposter syndrome, right? It's like, what the heck am I doing here? How am I, why do they even pick me? Like those sorts of things. And I'm curious, is that something that you can relate to, from your roles?
Well, I know what you mean by the imposter syndrome. I don't think that really applies to my experience, but I think just being, just having a reverence and a respect for the other folks in the room, and learning from them, and over time gaining your own confidence level. I think that's really what was a valuable part of that experience, is that the people everyone around us was so supportive. So that quickly led to having some confidence in your own research and your own opinions and so on. And what was a really important aspect of learning to be an analyst at Burton Group was being able to defend your positions. And so you could take any wild, harebrained idea and throw it out there. That's fine, but that was only part of the effort. I mean, you really had to back it up. I mean, why did you think this should be the way to go in this certain industry? Why do you think this technology is better than that one? You can't just throw wild statements around. You needed to back it up, and that was, I think, an important element of gaining that confidence level.
Yeah, I think having the ability to workshop ideas probably was helpful too, right? To say, okay, here's an idea, does this work? And I think Jim and I, we do this kind of on the side as well, is, okay, what do we think about this kind of concept, or where this is particularly going? Does it make sense? And having a free and open conversation, right? To say, okay, let's call each other on our BS if that's what it is, right? Or, tweak out and expand and contract maybe certain areas of an idea. And I think that would be very, very beneficial for those types of firms, especially when you're in an analyst firm where people are looking at you as kind of the megaphone, right, for a specific industry or vertical or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think another thing that Gerry said is around learning from each other. And I've started to incorporate that and say that to clients, like, you definitely brought us in as the experts, but we're going to learn from each other. And honestly, I think that's how I've become a much better consultant over my past 10 years in consulting, is learning from my clients, seeing how things are done in different places. Because it's not like I have another day job where I'm I am like manager or program manager in a company anymore, right? So now what I'm doing is consulting and working with different clients and learning from them, learning what they're doing that's best practice, and obviously combine that with research that we do. But it's a very important aspect, and I think if you have the personality of being open-minded, I think that helps you in any aspect of life. But I think it's a firm requirement when it comes to being in consulting and probably being an analyst as well. I'm sure, Gerry, that was kind of your experiences, like learning a lot from your clients.
Absolutely. And I think there's no limit on what you can learn or how much you can learn. I mean, it's a lifelong experience. And you're absolutely right, Jim, that conversations with customers were very enlightening. And it goes back to what Jeff said earlier about how can you know everything about everything. And you learn bits of information from every conversation that you have, whether it's talking to a customer directly about a specific topic or question, or getting briefings from vendors, or seeing demonstrations, or those fantastic one-on-one chats, in the conference hallway or at the bar afterwards. I mean, you learn every step of the way. So you try to bring all of that together as your combined experience and go forth from there.
So that's the past, and now let's talk the present. You're with Strata Identity at strata.io, strata.io, and you're the head of standards. What the heck does that mean?
Well, I've in some of my past roles, I've had, say, one foot in the standards community. Back at Burton Group, I authored a number of reports on things like SAML and WS Federation and XACML, and actually hosted a number of interoperability demonstrations at our annual Catalyst conference. So from that perspective, I'd say half a foot in the standards community. At Axiomatics, of course, technology was all built around the XACML standard, so pretty deeply involved with it there. But now with Strata, I think I've got both feet in the standards world, because part of what we're trying to do here is build out a new standard around what we call identity query language. And it's to help facilitate getting a common declarative form of access policy across a multi-cloud environment. And we can get deeper into identity fabrics and orchestration here in a moment, but it's really to publish a standard around this, a set of APIs, so that not just Strata, but other organizations can take a hold of this standard and incorporate that to facilitate this multi-cloud, multi-identity world we are in today.
I mean, that's fantastic, because that's really how these standards get started, right? If somebody takes a shot at drafting version 1, and then it goes from there. I mean, you were involved with some of the early standards development that today are very mature standards, correct?
That's right. And also some of the founders of Strata were also co-authors of some of those standards, like SAML, Security Assertions Markup Language, which is still heavily used today for federated single sign-on.
So, Gerry, you mentioned the identity orchestration, and what I've seen on the Strata website is identity orchestration for multi-cloud. Kind of wondering if you could put that more in layman's terms, or help our listeners, people like me, understand, from a plain English perspective, what does that mean?
Sure. Well, if you take a step back and you think about the pre-cloud days of identity and access management, we all enterprises had multiple what we called identity silos, right? They were typically connected or hardwired to a specific set of applications with a line of business, or maybe within a certain data center, and things of that nature. But now, over the last several years, cloud computing has emerged as the preferred way to deploy and manage application workloads. The promise of the cloud is cost savings, simplified operations, new capabilities that are available that we just were much better than the data center environments of the past. So, okay, great. So now everyone's moving to the cloud, but oh, by the way, we have all these new cloud identity systems. And each Azure, Google, Amazon, they all have their own way of doing identity. And then part of the challenge is that organizations are not just going to a single cloud platform. They want to spread out that risk, or maybe there's different tools that are better for different applications across the organization. And then, of course, you have all the different SaaS applications that we consume. So now we have this hybrid of, still some legacy identity clouds from on-premises world, but now across all of these multiple cloud environments. So how do you manage that? And that's where we talk about an identity fabric to start with, because the fabric is the connectivity tissue. It's how we connect to the legacy environments, to the cloud environments. And then you can begin to orchestrate or manage or facilitate that entire spectrum of technologies in a more single pane of glass fashion. So I'll stop there and pause.
It sounds to me like it's the development of a Rosetta Stone as a translation layer between all the disparate cloud languages that are out there, right? You mentioned Azure, Google, AWS, right? Those sorts of things. Everyone does identity in different ways. The concepts and structures may be slightly different, but at the end of the day, it still boils down to who has access to what, right? That's what identity kind of gets down to. And with the disparate methods, it seems to me like this identity fabric and this identity orchestration is trying to come up with that common language to be able to say, I want to give this user this thing, and then be able to translate it from whatever the common language is down to essentially the machine code for each of these different services. Is that an accurate depiction, at least in my brain, of how I see this kind of working together?
Yes, Jeff, I think it is, because in the absence of having that fabric and that orchestration layer, then you have to individually manage all those environments. And we know that can be expensive. You need staff to be experts in all of these different platforms. And then you have the chance of, a pretty good chance of inconsistent settings across these environments, which of course exposes you to different kinds of risk. So yeah, we're looking to have a single way to manage all of these access rules and policies, and then, as you said, transform them into the native format of those target systems. So that, we're not doing the enforcement in the Strata orchestration layer. Rather, we're just managing the access policies in a uniform way.
You mentioned identity query language, I think is what you referred to earlier, as a new standard to kind of pull that all together. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I don't know if I'm too familiar with that standard, and maybe it's so new that it's breaking. Probably not breaking news, but not as familiar maybe for the people in the identity space. Where is that in a process perspective? Who's working on it, and when do you think it might become something that's out there that people might be able to start leveraging?
Yeah, we think it's important enough, the work we're doing here across unifying the policy formats to standardize that aspect of it, so that it can be put out into a standards organization, have open source code available to utilize, so you can call the APIs, you can use the policy language, and have it work within your own environments. So it's still at a fairly nascent level, although we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. Right now, we're organizing a working group to get started on outlining the specification, defining the APIs, building some of the open source code. And we'll be doing that through the remainder of 2021. And you'll see various announcements around this streaming out over the course of the rest of this year, and then hoping to be more public by early in 2022 and going into a standards organization and really busting it open for a wider audience. So it's a fairly accelerated and aggressive timeline, but we want to get started on this right away and get a lot of important industry contributors behind that. We've been talking to a number of different folks in financial services, in insurance, and in the networking world, in the data services world. So it's not, what's interesting is, although we're calling it identity query language, or IDQL, it's a new acronym you all need to learn. But we are also seeing a lot of interest, not just from the application, the traditional sort of web application layer, but into the infrastructure of the cloud platforms, the data layer, and all the way to the networking. So you can think of it as sort of a east-west, across multiple cloud environments, but north-south across the stack, from the application to the data infrastructure and right down to the networking level. So it's really quite an expanded horizon we're talking about here.
So I always think, whenever I hear orchestration, I think of a conductor. And I would imagine in a scenario like we're talking about here, the conductor might be some kind of common dashboard where I go and set my policies or, configure these security settings that then my system's going to go out and reach out to my various cloud endpoints and enact those settings. Am I thinking about that in the right way?
Yes, you are. So there's sort of a central control plane, if you will, where you can rather author and manage these access policies, these identity policies. And then there will be connectors that are gateways that will take this central policy definition and convert it or map it to the bespoke format of that target system. And so you could use, for example, APIs to do that. If the Amazon IAM API is available to do this sort of manipulation, then great, we can just call that. Or you can have the connector do that mapping. So there's that kind of functionality at different levels, right? So you're right, Jim. You have the central place where you define the policies, and then you have APIs available so that the connectors can call, get the latest version of the policy for this data set or for this set of business apps, and then do that mapping or conversion and load it into the target system.
I can imagine that the challenges from the standpoint of, if I wasn't using an orchestration layer, trying to manage and understand my policies across a number of proprietary clouds. I would imagine those are a lot of the challenges that you faced in developing your solution.
Absolutely. And that's what we see customers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And in some cases, it can be overwhelming because you're under a lot of pressure. You're trying to move your applications and users to the cloud, but they're hardwired to their existing environments or systems. It's not, maybe at the executive level, it says it's easy to say, hey, let's just move to the cloud. But from the IT staff and the identity professionals, the network folks, it's not so easy to do that in an inefficient and risk safe way.
You mentioned one of the challenges that immediately popped to my head, at least when you were thinking of multiple clouds, and I think of the open S3 bucket that seems to be the root cause of so many different breaches and data exposures and things like that. And I can imagine with a mature orchestration and fabric in place, things like that would be potentially mitigated. Is that a good way to think about it? And are there other challenges that you can think of kind of that people should be aware of that this might help approach and solve for?
Well, there is that aspect, and I think that goes to the consistency, trying to apply a consistent level of security across different types of resources. So if we have an easier way to identify what container, whether it's an S3 bucket or some other kind of storage, has sensitive data, if it's has sensitive data for whatever reason, PII or so on, then we can apply a certain level of policy to that. And to do that automatically, I think can help mitigate against those kind of scenarios. I won't say it's 100%. Of course, nothing is 100%. It requires a lot of diligence, on everyone's part. But it will help automate, I think, a lot of these basic settings so that we can focus more attention on those, higher value environments that we need to.
I'm wondering, are there baselines that are, available in the industry, or someone's kind of said, all right, these are the best practice settings, and I'm wondering, does that exist for cloud environments? So in other words, here's the best practice AWS or Google Cloud settings, and then have you guys gone and baked that into the product where a organization can more or less say, okay, here on these settings I've deviated from the best practice setting, but at least I'm aware of that.
Okay, Jim, when you say the term best practice, these light bulbs go off in my head, and I think of Fred Cohen saying, there's no such thing as a best practice. And I won't go too far down that rat hole, but
I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I despise the term, and yet I use it all the time because I'm in the consulting field, and people ask me, what's the best practice? And the answer is it depends. But I also think there are these, hey, here's a baseline configuration for a Windows server that, and that's just a very simple example. But the idea is like, okay, if you were to lock down the server, here are the settings. And then most organizations can't operate their apps with all those restrictive settings, so they have to unroll some of them. And it's valuable, I think, at least to know where you've deviated.
right. Yeah, I think I rather like the term recommended settings or recommended practices because so few things are so uniform that we can just make a generic statement about them because security requirements vary so much industry to industry. Yes, there's a lot of commonality and we can focus on that 80-20 portion, but I hesitate to use the term best practice. But as far as are we baking that into the model here, at this stage we're focusing more on the basic building blocks. Not so much on maybe the templates that would be a part of a recommended palette in the future. I can anticipate that happening over time, but at the moment we're at the 101 stage here.
I kind of feel we're talking almost in terms of like contract language, right? We are negotiating the baseline risk that is acceptable, and then what are the areas that we're able to accept risk, and that might be a setting, here or there, those sorts of things. So I'm just kind of thinking here. It's like, okay, it sounds like if we can agree at least on a common platform, right? We can all agree that MFA is good, right? We should have that. All right, great. And then it becomes, okay, well, what are the methods for MFA? Okay, well, SMS, not really recommended anymore, but better than nothing, right? What's the target? And you kind of go through this negotiation between security and compliance and the business to kind of come up with best practice for that organization, using maybe a common kind of fundamental security setting that everyone agrees on, and then you tweak it from there until you're comfortable with whatever risk is identified as acceptable.
Agreed. And I think, MFA, multi-factor authentication, is something that a lot of people can agree on is a good thing. It's a step up. It's an improvement. And the terminologist discussion is fine as an exercise. But I think the real challenge for practitioners is how do we install it and implement it? Especially with all of these legacy systems that were never built in a cloud native way, and maybe we don't have the source code or don't control it. So, that's also something that an identity fabric can help you accomplish, because you can connect the MFA solution into the fabric, and then you all use the term orchestration, then it can orchestrate or facilitate the use of an MFA during the session without having to change the application. So that's another, I think, value point for an identity fabric that has this abstraction layer, because you're not hard coding or customizing or changing your applications. You can introduce something like an MFA at a higher level, and that's shown to be a real winning approach.
So we've been talking an awful lot about the cloud, and I know that you gave a Identiverse presentation way back in 2019 around bring your own identity. And there may be some overlap here a little bit with kind of fabrics and orchestrations and things like that, and maybe not. But can you sum up what that presentation was that you gave?
Wow, yeah, that was a real fun presentation for me to put together. I have to give a shout out to Steve Wilson, who really encouraged me to put that together. It's something that had been boiling over many, many years. I think even going back as far as 2008, when I first wrote about bring your own identity. And, I thought of this presentation as sort of as my own personal digital ID journey over time. And how it impacts you on a personal level. You know, as an analyst or as a practitioner, you're always thinking more from a corporate perspective or, you know, industry perspective. But that was really some of my own personal thoughts about, you know, the impact of single sign-on. Is it really a good thing? You know, the social login approach, which really is a formulation of bring your own identity, because what I said was, well, I've already proved my identity to some level with this other internet property or, you know, environment. Why can't I reuse that? You know, why do I have to register at every single website that I visit? So social login through Google or Apple or Facebook, I mean, that's everywhere today. And I think I have a little bit of buyer's remorse, actually, you know, that this is great for some people, but for me personally, I just am uncomfortable with that kind of approach because of all of the connectivity behind the scenes and all of the ability to track everything I do, whether it's through websites I visit or purchases I make, or even the devices I use are tracking data. And we don't have, I guess for me, we don't have enough visibility and transparency as to what is actually going on behind the scenes. And if I really knew that, then maybe I'd be more comfortable with it. And I guess I'm still in that state of I'm just uncomfortable with some of the technology capabilities that are out there today. You know, I used to rail against the data aggregators back in the day, you know, when you think of financial scoring and so on. And now it's just everywhere. And so that's where I'm at.
You know, one thought that I've been having is, you know, there's so many websites out there that still are not using a social identity provider. And you know, as you're creating a profile, you're thinking, okay, this site is definitely going to get breached at some point.
Right.
And they're going to take my data and dump it on the internet. And I really don't want to create a profile. And there are some sites that I'll walk away from. And then there are some that, like, you know, for example, I had to create an identity to sign up for Little League Baseball. And it was a local, you know, organization of Little League. It wasn't like the international Little League organization. So I'm thinking, okay, there's one more place that, you know, my private data is probably going to get breached from. But at the same time, you know, I think it's at the early stages of Bring Your Own Identity, some folks were thinking, okay, this is going to be the way I log into work or the way I log into my bank. And it's like, I could never imagine trusting that to my, you know, using my Google Gmail login or I don't have Facebook or Instagram or any of those, but I could not imagine trusting those to log into my corporate assets or to my financial records. So there's still value in it, but I don't think it kind of achieved what maybe one day or what, you know, 10, 15 years ago, what we hoped it could.
Well, I think that, you know, the world has changed a lot since then. You know, the technology has advanced so quickly to surpass, I think, what we thought of, you know, say 15 years ago or so. And that'll continue to be the case. I think a lot of focus right now is around identity proofing. You know, it's not an area I cover or focus on myself, but, you know, I see a lot of interest and research in this area because how can we really proof identity in an online setting without a face-to-face, you know, going to your bank or to the motor vehicle office or what have you? So that's one thing. And also, you know, how can we get digital identifiers out to, you know, the masses of population that maybe are not as technology enabled as you know, those of us in, you know, developed countries. So I think there's always new challenges to work on.
I think there's a potential, like we kick around a lot on this podcast, the idea of decentralized identity, and, you know, the use cases we think of a lot are things like government organizations issuing like a blockchain ID. I think big tech could, you know, put together a consortium and do that. But I think at the same time, they have so much value from having your identity data in their proprietary systems that, where's the business benefit of putting together something that is like hey, we're going to put you in charge of your own identity. Like how are they going to make money off of that?
All right, Jim. So you said best practices, and now you said blockchain. What are you trying to do to me here? This is going off the rails pretty quick.
I'm trying to get you fired up, man.
Oh man. So control of your own identity. Well, you're right. How does the corporate world make money off of that if we truly can control what aspects of our identity are released in what manner and under what conditions? That's something we talked about at Burton Group as well. We called it the limited liability persona. And it was the concept that you could actually incorporate a persona and therefore have some of the legal protections that such an incorporation would provide. And I think it's a fantastic concept. The self-sovereign folks are following sort of a line of thinking from that. But it's a difficult business model. I think as consumers, yes, we want to control our identity data, but from a commercial business perspective, there's certainly a lot of friction between releasing that power. It's a very asynchronous power arrangement today, and I think the concept of self-sovereign identity is trying to equalize that. It's very difficult to get that balance, those scales back in balance.
I think it's an area that a lot of people are very interested in, and I feel like that can be multiple episodes for our show. So maybe we'll pull it back and tackle that in a future episode with you, Gerry. But how about we end out on a little bit lighter note so that we're not leaving this dense identity conversation hanging in the air. Jim, what do you have for us for this week to kind of lighten the mood?
Yeah, and I was just thinking about how WhatsApp sold for over $3 billion, and it wasn't for the really cool app, it was for all the identities. At least that's what I understand. But being that I didn't get a sizable cut of that $3 billion, or really any of the $3 billion, what's probably my best shot of, and it's not a really good shot, but my best shot of getting to those multi-million-dollar riches is through the lottery. So the Powerball jackpot is up to $286 million. We'll start with Gerry. How would you spend your days if you won the Powerball jackpot?
Wow. I think we'd probably move from our suburban homestead to a real homestead to start with. But and if we win all 286 million, you say one winner?
One winner. Let's just assume that.
Yeah, that's quite a bit. I would have to say we'd start a real big philanthropy expedition there, because there's a whole lot of folks I think who could use some of that. I think that's where I'd spend a lot of my days is trying to help a whole lot of people.
I'm with you, Gerry. I think, first, the people that are close to me in my life, I definitely would hook them up, just set them up and make sure that they, whatever's been worrying them from a financial burden perspective is taken care of. Then I probably would spend about a year, wasting a lot of time on beaches and traveling around the world. But I really feel like that would get boring. And where I'd have to end up eventually is working on something important that's going to change the world. Every time I get into one of these conversations, I ultimately end up saying, do I really need $286 million to do that? Or could I just do that? But that is what I think I would do is, I'd spend some time like just blowing some money after I help people out. And then I'd do something important. I'd start a business or help people start businesses. Of course, I think we turned the Identity at the Center podcast into a video podcast. We'd be able to do much more of that stuff. And Jeff would be able to buy all the equipment that he wanted because I would definitely share.
Yeah, I think Jeff is the gadget guy of the trio here. So, yeah, you could buy more gadgets, Jeff.
Yes. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah. So, of course, thanks for the setup on the gadget stuff, because I'm already thinking like, okay, I have an electric car, have a Tesla, which I love. I'm thinking electric RV of some sort. So I'm probably going to partner up with Elon Musk or some other, electric luminary to develop a electric RV versus the gas guzzlers you see out there. And, of course, I'm going to need an electric plane to be able to get around the world and do that travel that has some sort of cargo bay for my electric car and my RV. So now we're really going crazy with the money. But yeah, I think I would, be relatively comfortable and be free from the shackles of financial burdens is, to get out there, travel, make sure family and friends are taken care of, that they don't have to worry about either, and then start to figure out what does maybe something like a trickle down charity look like, where it starts maybe at a certain level, and you help out people at maybe the rung kind of below you, and then they help out the people on the rung below them, and kind of pull everyone up in that kind of manner. And because I think there's a lot of scenarios where people who have been really in bad shape have won, and they couldn't handle it right away. Right, they blow the money, and they lose it right away. They turn to, vices maybe that don't help them be healthy and, mentally or physically, things like that. So, that's an idea that I've kind of tossed around with some sort of like trickle down charity, where it's kind of like, I hate to use classes, but like the upper class helps the middle class, and then the middle class, free of their financial burden, starts to help the lower class. So some sort of scenario like that. But so much for ending on a high note. I feel like we got a little bit
Right.
yeah, a little bit with that. So, all right. I know we've run a little bit long here, but I think it was a really good conversation. But I do want to start to wrap things up, just to be respectful of people's time. So, what I'll do is I'll pass it around the room for kind of any final thoughts, and then Gerry, if there's any other kind of analyst nuggets or tidbits or inside baseball that you feel like sharing, now would be a good time to do it. So let's go with you, Gerry.
Well, it's been great to talk to both of you about some of the ideas. It brought back some of the memories, especially the Burton Group memories. And, I do remember dealing with vendors was always a challenge. And now I've been working at a vendor a couple of times here. But they would certainly berate you on the side channel if you didn't recommend them over someone else, or of course about their position in a paper. So a lot of that definitely happened in the back rooms. But it's been great to be part of the podcast series. We'd love to come back in the future. Maybe we'd make a little progress down the road here with the IDQL effort, and let you know what all's happening there. But thanks again for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gerry. And definitely, once we have some firm things around IDQL, identity query language, definitely let's get that on the calendar and start to figure out how do we help contribute and push that forward. You mentioned the analyst firm with the the vendors, and I'm not looking for a comment. I'm just going to throw this out there. Is I wonder what it was like in the Microsoft and Okta war rooms when the most recent access management quadrant came out from Gartner, where Okta was finally dethroned as the upper right. So I think that was probably a very interesting conversation. And the unfortunate thing is both are great products, right? But I think there is so much competition to be that upper right or top or whatever it is, right? And then quadrants or leadership compasses, wherever they may be. I'm just going to throw that out there. I think that would be an interesting area to be a fly on the room and kind of listen to the conversation. So, Jim, what about you? Any kind of final thoughts before we leave it for this week?
Jeff, I did not think you were a trickle-down economics kind of guy.
Doesn't work in the economy, I'll tell you that right now.
If you asked me to name 1,000 people who would have said what you said, you would not have even made the list. You wouldn't have even been 1,001. You shocked me with that answer. But to everyone who listens, thank you so much for putting up with us and listening to us on a weekly basis. Thank you to Gerry giving us his time today. And I'd encourage you all to connect with Jeff and I on LinkedIn. Gerry, I think the same thing for you, right? We'll have all that contact info in the show notes. And, networking is just one of my favorite parts about doing what we do.
Yeah, we get a lot of content from our listeners and the folks who connect with us. And we try to bring it out here for folks to listen to and get great guests and interesting conversations like Gerry and others. So, yeah, keep those connections and ideas coming. Those are definitely, we read them all, and we try to incorporate as much as we can, into episodes over time as we work through things. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thank you, Gerry, for joining us. If you want to learn more about strata.io or Strata Identity, it's strata, strata.io on the web. You can also visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com, and you can find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. So with that, appreciate everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.